Thank you for attending, and thank you also to the organizers and volunteers and sponsors for making this event possible. Looking forward to a lot of great talks today. So let's get started. My name is Uros, and I'm working currently as a site reliability engineer in Adidas. And I'm here today to tell you a bit of a DevOps story and all the crazy things that happens along the way. So let's get started. But before that, first, like why this talk even matters and why we're here. Basically, trying to implement DevOps is already an overwhelming process and not very straightforward. And especially in the last couple of years, we've seen a tendency in SRE growing everywhere, right? So if you haven't been living under a rock, SRE, Site Reliability Engineering, is basically was invented at Google 2003, and it revolves around using the same engineering principles for building a product to operations. It is important because when you want to deal with your stability and resilience, this is something that works great. Even if you're a small company and if you think you don't need stability, you need your reputation, so you always want to keep your things stable. So there have been so far 3 books about SRE, one of which, these were all from Google, and one of which has made it to O'Reilly's top seller list. And there's also been many other books around SRE and many publications online, right? But a lot of the things talk about SRE in a vacuum, right? They're assuming that you're starting from a clean slate or that you're just starting, right? But the reality is that it's not so simple, and you mostly already have some kind of a DevOps setup implemented, right? And there aren't many really a lot of opportunities to kind of see how it all fits together. So I'm going to give you a spoiler. We implemented SRE in Adidas, and it has worked great for us. And basically, so what? This talk is about sharing some of our lessons learned and some of the, let's say, pitfalls that we found, and hopefully you can learn from this and see if it's something you can implement in your own organization, whether you're a large enterprise or a small startup. So a bit of history first, where we're coming from. So Adidas, tech, how come? This question comes a lot. Adidas is not a tech company, but is a tech-enabled company. So around 7-8 years ago, we started investing heavily into internal tech department and building a very strong foundation on the platform side. I hear a bit of an echo. Can you drop the mic a bit? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So basically, we built a strong platform engineering area and invested heavily into DevOps. And we actually became fascinated with DevOps. And we took a whole company on this crazy game called DevOps Cup, where teams competed against each other, very healthy competition, of course, into who will be giving the most value to the business out of its DevOps transformation. And it was pretty cool. And I won't talk much about this. I leave some links to some other talks that talk about this in detail. But the bottom line is that we've been investing very heavily into automation, CI/CD, strong platform engineering area. And all of this has brought great value to our business. And today I'll focus mostly on the e-commerce side of things. To set some examples, the 2016, the e-commerce business was generating under 1,000 million of revenue, and last year it started generating much more, right? So all of this, if you translate it into traffic on the site and how much load it puts on the system, To put some things in perspective, we are reaching peaks of 25,000 orders per minute. And when you translate that into direct hits on the backends and on the site, user facing, we get up to 2 million requests per second at peak times. And this is mostly like Black Friday, holiday sales, Singles Day, which is huge in China, and some of our hype drops that are also very famous. So what I'm trying to say is that when you think about this all generates a lot of backend calls, traces, logs, scheduled jobs, right? So let's say that the scale of the system is pretty big. And when we talk about the system, this is more or less how it looks like. So basically, each of these boxes will represent a kind of an area of what the user might do, right? So the user might be getting, let's say, interacting as a member, logging in, redeeming points, or browsing the site, and then, they would use each of these like services in the backend to do that, right? Getting the product, searching, they would show personalized content and stuff like that, or maybe buying something, and then they would use these services in the orange and red part. Basically, on the left side, you can see all the front-facing channels, and we have two mobile applications, a website, and more these days we have these smart stores where you have like things like self-checkout, and the stores are getting more and more digitalized as we go along. So as you see, it has certain complexity, and it's not trivial to reason about it. And yeah, so the user might pass through all of these flows. So what was kind of the need for site reliability engineering, or what kind of problem we were trying to solve? Well, basically, DevOps has worked great for us, but it didn't solve all our problems, and it wasn't giving us the premium user experience that we needed. And by that, I mean, it didn't focus enough on production, right? So we reduced the number of outages, of critical incidents, but we still had these like slow burning issues, the one that happen not so often, but then they get dragged on for weeks, right? And usually those issues are sitting between different teams, and they're not so easy to solve from within one team, right? Also, we had a lot of DevOps engineers. I know that's not a thing, but I think in every company you have people that are DevOps engineers, even though they shouldn't. And these people were mostly focused on automation heavily, but they didn't focus enough on like socio-technical aspects of the job, which is bridging the gaps, not only between operations and development, but also between, let's say, architecture and product, for example, right? Designing for failure from the get-go and things like that. And also teams are mostly focused on their own subsystem or their component, and as your system becomes more complex and evolves, it's not enough, because it will have dependencies, and something that happens on the back end might impact something on the front end that is 3 or 4 layers down, and it won't be immediately obvious, right? So just being focused on your own component, it's not going to be enough. So SRE started actually pretty spontaneous. It came a bit bottom up, top down. We had one area that was very critical, checkout area, and they started building a lot of internal tools and things like tools for feature flags, configuration management, and also focused a lot on the release process. And they saw SRE as something that's pretty good, and they started proposing it to the wider organization, right? We had another team that was actually doing SRE without even knowing it's called SRE, right? They were completely owning their operations and really measuring everything related to that. But even the senior leadership has recognized SRE as something that can help us fix these problems. So what was decided was to start from, to leverage the already existing operations infrastructure and organization and launch a small pilot of SRE in one area. And basically it focused on these things, right? On release process and stability and observability. And the pilot went pretty good, and we decided to scale it to the entire organization. And so we transformed our operations into site reliability engineering, and we started scaling it and transforming it through a couple of different ways. So we started hiring a specific role that is called SRE, site reliability engineer, right? And for this, we cast a really wide net. We didn't really have a specific profile in mind. We had, people applying from all over the background, from different kind of backgrounds, and it really ended up forming very interesting SRE teams that could solve very different problems. To give you an example, like the coding challenge and the whole interview process was very open. We would have, I think, like 5 pillars: observability, system design, resilience, automation, and coding. I think there was one more. And then the candidates would have to reason about all of these 5 pillars. We would give them an example project and say, this is a real use case, like a microservice architecture, right? How would you deploy it? How would you run it? How would you automate it? What would be the release process? What would be the development process? And then they would have to also focus on one area and show that they're specialized in at least one of these things, right? We also started upskilling existing operations roles into SRE. And we also, let's say, converted people from other job families like backend and frontend to where we saw potential to become SREs. And lastly, we assigned these SRE teams into product teams. So where we could, where the products were critical, we would assign an SRE team per product. That's not always possible. And in those cases, we would have one SRE team to serve a couple of different products. I'm going to jump straight into the good parts and to the benefits that we saw. And basically, I actually wanted to show you a bunch of numbers and graphs, how we dropped the mean time to detect or mean time to recover. But I think maybe those would just be numbers. And I think it's more important to talk about some things that are more difficult to measure, but make all the difference, right? And I would like to call out a collaboration throughout the software development lifecycle as a very important thing, but with a focus on production, right? And to give a few examples, like now when you have SRE as part of every step, as an advocate for how things will run in production, then they would join the refinements, the design meetings with architecture, right? And you would see that things would change, like microservices would be merged or removed or functionalities changed. HTTP requests also removed or merged whenever possible, and things like that. Also, if you already have a team that is very DevOps oriented and they are building, running, owning their own services, then SRE would come in there and to bring their game to the next level, because they would basically focus now on all of these things I mentioned previously, and the team can focus on delivering value, right? One of the things that is, let's say, not a zero-sum game, but observability is a thing that you have to make constant effort into, to make sure that you're measuring the correct things. So you would have an SRE with a dedicated capacity that would all the time keep on doing better observability. We have a strong platform engineering area, as I said, and they basically consist of different teams. So you have a platform team for Kafka, a platform team for Kubernetes, and then they would provide these building blocks. But as technologies evolve, things get more complex, right? So the platform team for Kubernetes, they can give you the building blocks, but you have to configure your HPAs, PDBs, right? You have to, the node affinities, all of these things, things get pretty complex. And then when you extrapolate that to all the other platforms and technologies, it's very difficult for one product team to know how to configure perfect Kafka throughput, but also have all the resilience that's needed, how to deploy their application to be as resilient as possible, right? And then also to make it observable. So now with this dedicated effort, we were able to do that. So basically they were acting as a kind of a bridge between the platform and the product, where they would help to use these building blocks as best as possible. And we started measuring everything, right? I know I said that numbers are not important, but I meant that in this context. But for your company and for your business, numbers are important, right? And you need to measure everything. So going beyond let's say you have the red metrics, the use metrics, the golden signals, right? And then on top of that, you would have now SLIs and SLOs that SREs bring, and also ultimately business metrics, right? The metrics that actually your business cares about. One thing that really worked great for us is also value streams. This morning there was a great talk that talked about this a bit. So if we look at this diagram from before, you can see that each of these little boxes, they kind of do one thing, right? So either people interacting or browsing the site or buying, right? So the thing is that, as I mentioned previously, when teams are focused on their own product or their own team, they don't have this end-to-end visibility, right? And why is this a problem? Increased complexity, right? The more complex your system becomes, there are more moving pieces. So what we figured out is that if we assign different SRE value streams as groups, they can cover this end-to-end thing. To give you an example, let's say you work in payments and you work on the back end, and between you and the front end there are like 5 different teams, or it can be 3, whatever. But it's very important for you to know, let's say, how the credit card widget works, right? Because whenever there is some sort of an issue, whenever someone reports an issue, you don't know where it's coming from, right? So you have to be intimate with all of these in between to be able to effectively troubleshoot issues and actually resolve them as fast as possible, right? So value streams, right? So we divided people in based on functionality, and at the end of the day, they all have a shared business metric that they contribute to, and we're all accountable to keeping this business metric stable. Another honorable mention that I want to make is one role as part of the SRE that is really important. I don't know if you can guess what role is this. I guess not. Service management, of course. So service management is a part of SRE. Actually, I think the name is SRE and domain operations, so we're not just SREs, there are more people here. And service management is not a new thing. It has been a part of, it has been a part of Adidas for a long time. But they really do take care of a lot of work that might seem trivial, but it can really add up, right? So first is, I won't say enforce, but encouraging the release process. So it's very important that when you have an SRE organization and you all agree to do, one thing, then that you have someone that actually, makes all of the other teams accountable, because teams have different maturity levels. So you have someone accountable to make all of these teams follow the same process. Another thing is, when you increase your own stability and reliability, you'll realize that most of your problems are coming from third-party outages, like payment providers, Salesforce, and stuff like that. And it can get really tricky to follow up on all of these third-party incidents that revolve around, contacting external partners, et cetera, because there are always contracts involved, and it's not let's say, a proper job for an engineer. They also work as incident resolution facilitators. So we basically have a huge chat room that is a 24/7 critical incident chat room. And you might think this doesn't work, but it actually works. And whenever there is a critical incident, these people make sure that the right teams get in the right war room and resolve the incident as fast as possible. Because when you are present in 80 markets globally, 24/7. Any kind of an outage is causing revenue bleed, right? And in case if you're a small company, you're causing reputation bleed, which is also important. So they make sure that correct teams get into the war room and resolve the incidents, because in our case we might have like 100 different teams, and you never know. You won't always know where the problem is. And also a lot of communications and post-mortem facilitation as a neutral party, right? To make sure that the process is blameless. And also to communicate to everyone in a proper way, like what happened, and give transparency to the whole organization about these incidents and what we're doing, right? Let's talk about some parts that are not so easy, I would say. Basically, silo, right? Whenever you have a different organization and you put it inside a product team, there are potential silos that could be happening. So, and this especially becomes important when your SRE team is a bit bigger. Let's say you have like 3 or 4 people, and the product team is also bigger, then the SRE team will have the tendency to have their own backlog or have their own daily stand-ups, right? And that's a red flag. So you want your SREs to be another member of the product team, but just with a different skill set, right? And all of the things are shared concern. Then this one I would say is very important, which is not knowing the functionality of your service. So if your SREs are treating the applications as black boxes and they don't know what they're doing, it's not SRE, right? You're just doing, you're staying at this infrastructure level, basically. And this is important because when you're troubleshooting incidents and production issues, you need to know how things work, right? What is the expected behavior? If you don't have that, that starting point, it's always going to be confusion, right? So it's very important that SREs have this context. They know how things are working, and by that I don't mean just knowing the code. I mean knowing the business context behind it. Meaning that if I have this issue happening, what is the business impact? Are we losing money? Are we not losing money? How many customers are impacted, right? So this is why it's very important that you actually have this context, and your SRE needs to be intimate with this, with the functionalities of the product they're in. However, in cases where SREs will be covering a lot of product teams, it's not going to be possible for them to know code of each of the service, right? Obviously. But still, they have to know the basic high-level flows and how things work, right? That's like the bare minimum. Labeling operations as SRE. This is also something that someone might have tendency to do, and it's also a red flag. Basically, operations, we still have a lot of operations roles within our organization, and it's pretty, they have their role, and what they're doing is contributing value, but it's a different type of work, right? So you need to have a clear distinction between SRE and operations, what they do and what they don't. And the fourth one is gatekeeping versus empowerment. In cases where the SRE team will be focused a lot on, let's say that the team has a low maturity and low stability, and then the SRE team will have to do a lot of firefighting to elevate the stability of the product, of the services, right? There might be some weird dynamics happening where the product team will want to push their changes, and the SRE team will want to block their changes, right? And that's also a bad dynamic, and what you should always focus your SREs on empowerment, right? So they shouldn't be the ones in control of everything, in control of production or responsible for production. It should be a shared concern between your product team and your SRE team. Right, so we made it almost to the end. Thank you for sticking until the end. I just have a couple of parting words. So if you take away anything from this talk, let it be just this one last slide. So basically, use SRE to empower product teams, right? Don't try to hire as many SREs as you want for your services, because there will always be more services, more projects, more developers than SREs, right? You will never be able to cover everything. So make sure that your SREs are actually being these, let's say, best practices advocates within the product teams, and that the product teams themselves that have a mature, let's say, a certain level of DevOps maturity can actually take care of the whole cycle, even production, right? Educate your SREs with functional context and with the business context and the functionalities behind of the services that they're doing, right? So don't make them stay at this superficial infrastructure level and configuration level, because that way you will it will start creating some not my problem kind of a syndrome, where probably the SRE team will be focused more on configurations and infrastructure and observability, and then all of the functional things, they will say, well, you know, this is not my problem, this is not my area, let's move this back to the developers, right? And that's also a weird dynamic. And if you can't have SRE in every product team, then try to be as much as self-service as possible and scale them through things like internal tooling, documentation. There are a couple of great talks later on internal developer platforms, right? So those are some great examples on how you can scale. And lastly, one thing is don't stress over the SRE book. This book is great. It's written by Google. None of us here is Google. They have their own problems and their own complexity. We have, you know, all of the other companies have their own problems, their own complexities. And it's a great guide. You should definitely read it, but take it with a good pinch of salt on the things that say there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.